I completed the painting with the dark tree with the light background behind it. And so we're now going to do a second painting. And when we did these little preliminary sketches, I liked this one of the light tree with not an entire dark area behind it, but quite a bit of dark area behind it, and then a place where the tree shifts and becomes a dark tree against a light background. So you get this little shift back and forth between the two. And then these hills being a little bit darker than this area in front. Then the other thing to think about is, how am I going to start this? How am I going to make this work? I have decided that, well, I masked out the tree, I masked out the edge of this foreground area, and I made the hills higher. So the tree actually stays in front of the hills the whole way. And then I've got a small amount of sky. You know, when we did that last painting, I really liked what happened on that second layer of sky that I put in, where I came in and painted around the clouds and then brought the blue in onto the hills. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wait and not paint that sky until after I've got these hills pretty much together, and then we'll bring that blue from the sky in onto this back hill back here. I can vary how much it is, and like the big puffy white cloud could be right above this tree to sort of mimic the shape of that tree up into that cloud, similar to what I liked this mimic of this cloud and the tree. So the two of them were sort of talking to each other. And this thing of the tree standing out against that background differently than it does where it's dark back behind. So we're going to be playing with that. I haven't yet mixed my greens, but I'm going to start by doing a lighter green in here and then making that dark patch. So let's go ahead and get these mixed up. So the lighter green, let's go ahead and start. I've got a little bit of sort of a yellow brown in here. That's going to be just fine in my mixture. So let me just use that spot and add sap green to it, because we want to dull down that sap green just a little bit. It's a little too intense. It's lovely, but just a hair intense. So if we add just a little bit of burnt sienna, and this was burnt sienna in this area here, if we add just a little bit of burnt sienna to it, it's going to make it a little bit more of an olive green. And is that going to be enough? Let me just mix a bit more just in case. Okay, now that dark area, so I can start with this area that had some burnt sienna in it, put my green into there, maybe add a little hooker's green as well because it's more of a blue green. And then we're going to want to be making this really quite dark. And so I can add ultramarine blue to it. I can add indithrone blue to it. I could add indigo to it. Any one of these little bit darker blues could go in here. And which do I want to do? If I do ultramarine blue, it's going to granulate a bit more. This is ultramarine blue that I'm adding in here. It's going to granulate a bit more. And then if I really want to get this dark, I have to add the opposite color into there. So maybe rather than burnt sienna, I'm going to add my permanent brown, which is a red brown. I could also add just a little bit of quinacridone rose into there. Okay, so that is making, let's have a look at this, see what we've got. Find one of my, I've got some green browns on here. Let's just see how we like this. Maybe a little more blue in it. get as much paint out of my brush here as I can, because so that's a little bit more blue that comes in on top of that green. Yeah, I think that's going to work. Okay, so get the rest of that paint out of there as much as I can. I'm just pushing it on the side of my pan to pull as much paint out of this brush as I possibly can, because that's going to come later, and I don't want to have that dirtied in my brush when I first start with that lighter green. Now I'm going to pre-wet this area. Thing is, it's sort of learning how the paint reacts on a wet page versus a dry page. If I have a dry page, I'd have to come in with pretty wet paint to get it to move around. If I pre-wet this a little bit, then I'm going to have a damp page that I'm working with, or a wet page, depending on how much I pre-wet this. I'm not going to super heavy pre-wet it. Just come up to the top of those mountains. I'm not going to wet the sky, because if I do, all that green's going to bleed right up into the sky. So then we're going to start by putting a green layer down, and then I'm going to come back in and add that darker so that I can get a really soft edge between the dark area and the light area. If I wanted to have a hard edge between them, I'd want to have it dry, so that between those two, so that you would get a hard edge. And so this putting this resist down here gives me a hard edge where those two meet. I'll look at this on the side and see if I've got everything wet. So we're painting right over this tree. I used a sponge. It was actually a almost dead Mr. Clean Magic Eraser to do these little leaves so that I could get that sort of unevenness there. I'm pretty happy with how that came out, but it left some nice sky holes, or in this case, mountain holes, so that we'll be able to see this other color through here. Oops. I guess that shape is going to change a little bit. Don't always paint right in the lines, do we? And I'm putting this green right in underneath of where the dark's going to go, just so that there's another layer of color in there. It also helps keep that area damp. Okay, so now we've got green hills, and let's come in with that darker color and see what's going to happen. I'm going to come back in with that nice fat round brush, and this was where we wanted it the darkest, is right next to the tree here. And there were some bushes there that are also getting paint. I didn't fill in those bushes 100% where the what do I want to say, so that we got a dark area underneath of those bushes and light on the top of them. Let me add a little bit of phthalo blue to my mixture here, just to get a variation in the color as we work across. Pick some of that up. And this is sort of that first hill. I'm just thinking about how maybe it's going to feel like there's a cloud that worked across through there as well. So the darkest is down in here, and I feel like I'm going to have to go a little thicker down in there to really keep that dark. So let me add some more ultramarine blue to my mixture. a little more Hooker's green, and just to make this thicker, thicker, because I've got paint down there, but it's sitting pretty wet. And if I add some more pigment, am I going to be able to get it to sit? And Hooker's green, come on in. Let's pick up some of this into my brush. Okay, now I've got that thicker in my brush. Okay, now let's see if this will sit here a little better. So you can sort of see that it really wanted to run. So this particular hill comes down in sort of down in there. This is looking pretty good. I'm liking that. I've got another tree here which is going to be interesting to be against a little bit lighter space. Maybe that'll come up just a little bit more in there. And then that tree will be darker as it gets up into the hills back behind. Okay, anything else I want to do on this right now? Maybe just a little more of this darker in here. And that pathway is, this is all going to sort of bleed, and it'll bleed up into that area up above. Okay, I'm going to dry my brush, and I think I'm going to have to let this sit now. And, oh, Margaret, you know, you've done what you tell your students not to do, and that is you did not paint all the way into the corner. Get some of that drier paint. Let's get this right into this corner. Pull that right through. Maybe get a little of that lighter. It's okay if some of that lighter, and that didn't get quite into that corner either. So busy thinking about the other side that I wasn't thinking where my brush finished or didn't finish over there. So we need to get a little bit more in that corner. Okay, so I think we can let this run just a wee touch up. And then let it sit. I'm going to let that dry. So then, after that dries, then we'll be worrying about what to do with the sky, what to do with this foreground, how to deal with all of that. But I think we need to leave this alone. I'm just looking at a few things and going, maybe, I don't know. You know me, I have a hard time making myself totally stop. But this has got to dry now before I can really do any detail work on it. So let's let it sit and dry. So yesterday I put the greens on, but before I leave this, I want to go ahead and get the sky put in so that when we work on this next week, I'll be able to pull off the resist from the tree and work on this foreground and then any little details that we need in the back. So let's go ahead and do the sky. Sort of using this as a reference, a nice little puffy cloud. I'm going to pull some of that blue down onto this hill to sort of dull it down a little bit. And that's going to be it. Not going to be a whole lot here. Just get that sky in. So I've wet my brush, and I'm going to put just a little bit of blue on it so I can see what I'm doing. And then, so we're going to leave out the white of the sky. This is dry paper that I'm working on, but this is a wet brush. And so I'm wanting to sort of make some little round cloud shapes up here as I come into this cloud. And maybe it billows, and get a little bit more down into there. I'm going to come in and put more blue in on here. So this is just a thing to get this wet. And quite a bit of blue sky over here, but let's make another cloud somewhere around the top of this hill. Okay, so now I'm going to start putting this blue in. We want it darkest up above because you do get a grade between the dark at the sky and down toward the horizon. And then I wanted to bring this in onto this hill. Let that run down in there a little more. Don't need those white spots. Just felt like this hill needed to blue down a little bit to make it go back. So now I'm going to rinse my brush, dry it out part way, and then pick up the bottom of this and just grade it down this hillside. Let it find some spaces. I don't want to make it too dark behind these trees because if you remember correctly, we're going to let that tree be a little bit darker than the background up above. And then do I need any more paint in here? Let me make it a little bit darker blue right over in here. And I can bring it into this cloud a little bit more. Make sure the shape of that. So while it's still pretty wet like this, it's going to run nicely. And as long as I've got it evenly wet, we'll be okay. And make sure that it's not. Get a little cobalt blue directly out of the pan just to make this even a little darker right up here. All right, let that run downwards a little. And I also need to really make sure I've got round shapes up here. Let's not have those the same. And then once this dries, then I can come back in and put a dark side into that, that cloud. A little darker on my brush, but I sort of like that little dark spot there. Okay, so I think we're at the point where I'm going to let this sit. And next week we will get back to doing some of the details. There's a little tree right here that I think is going to be fun to put in, but I'm going to do it when I do those other trees. So that was all I was going to do on this for today. Skies in, hills are in, and then next week we'll be able to pull this resist, work on the foreground and some little details in those clouds. So that's it for now.